Hello, it is good to be back for episode 16. Evan, how are you? New microphone, who dis?
Yeah, very good. I think my voice sounds even better on this microphone than it did before, which is amazing.
Yeah, I heard you've been getting a few good reviews of the voice, according to Roisin, so we'll say no more on that. But today we have a guy called Ben Harkin, who is a really young guy. He's only 20 and he wrote a book last year about climate change. Time Nor Tide, Climate Change in Ireland it's called. And he basically just kind of explores the kind of imminent crisis that we're having, I suppose. It's kind of a hard way to put a positive spin on this issue. But I'm not sure, Evan, what you think. Do you get like anxiety when you think about climate change, or do you kind of put it to the back of your head, or how do you go about this?
It depends. Like if I do a deep dive into it and actually hear all the stats and like actually what's going to happen in the very near future, yeah, it does like cause anxiety and like you do get worried, but very quickly that kind of just fades away. That's how I feel anyway. Like if I actually listen to like podcasts or something on it, or I read about the imminent disaster that is awaiting our mankind, yeah, I do get worried, but very quickly it fades away and I'm back to being a very wasteful.
Yeah, and it's just such a difficult topic, and I think one thing I think is important with this book is that there's no real obvious place to begin to educate yourself on that. So I think that's kind of a big thing for people is like, where do you actually start and how do you learn about this? Because I don't know enough about this topic at all.
Yeah, probably looking first is how big of a problem it is, I guess. And then also I think the next step is what can each individual do to play their part, because we're not going to solve this overnight and we may not even solve it at all, but if everyone does change their behavior, that's how it is. We actually have to stand a chance.
That's something we get into talking about personal responsibility actually. But Ben is kind of clear that it is going to be a government thing at the end of the day. And one kind of interesting topic, obviously everyone loves traveling, and obviously I think most people know that aviation and transport by plane isn't kind of the most ecologically friendly solution. And one solution that he had, I'm not sure if this was like his own idea or if he read this before, but was that there's like an air miles cap each individual has per year. So, but then you could like say if you had like 1,000 per year, but you didn't go for like 5 years, you'd then have like 5,000 on the sixth year, and then you might be able to like travel the whole world in like one go or something. Now, I thought it was an absolutely disgraceful idea. Like I said it to him. I was like, I don't think that's a good idea. But when I was thinking about it, do you think it could like lead to this kind of cool time where there's like an age of exploration where people are going on really long journeys by boat and by train, and then with the work from home culture, that if it allows you to go to leave work for maybe like 3 or 4 months at a time, and say you go and do like an interrail or something, and it's all
Yeah,
by
when I think of that idea, I automatically just think of fraud and how people are going to take advantage of that. Like, say, if you'll be able to buy other people's miles off people, or if you want to get more miles, you can make a donation to the government to help the fight against climate
climate
change,
change.
stuff like that. Like, and I think realistically, it's never going to happen.
Mm.
But if it did happen, yeah, maybe that could happen. That everyone goes on these year-long trips and saves up. But imagine how grim that would be. That only once every 5 years you're doing that kind of stuff.
No, but because if you went by boat, you wouldn't have as much. You wouldn't be using your air miles. So like, imagine you got like a boat across the Atlantic to the
Okay,
US.
but
It was like kind of
are
a
ferries not ridiculously bad for the environment as well, though?
probably. This is the thing. It's
And
like
big
any
cargo ships, like, do you ever see the black smoke that comes out of those yokes when they're sailing
yeah.
across?
That's the thing. It's like kind of any solution you give seems to kind of fall down the same trap. So I don't know. I think what you say about personal responsibility is so important, but it's like it's just to go back to it. No one actually knows what they're supposed to do.
Exactly. And also, though, it comes down to like, even if we're with personal responsibility, like if China doesn't buy into this, or like the big powers in Asia that are emitting ridiculous pollution to their airs every day. And also, like, if you look at like private jets in the US, like, it's a joke, like how the amount of private jets, if like on the nights of big fights in Vegas, if you ever see the airport there, what was it, McFarland Airport or something like that, just right beside the strip, they have to sometimes like expand the parking for like private jets for those big fights, like, because everyone's flying in and all. Even like when the Ryder Cup and all was on, like they had whole fields of helicopters and private jets like flying into Baldonnel and the other aerodromes like in Ireland, like that kind of stuff. Like those individual trips themselves is like a whole year's worth of like one person doing as much as they can to reduce their behavior. So without taking away those or reducing those or trying to avoid those situations, I don't know how successful we'll actually be.
Yeah, and it's kind of what that kind of shows as well is like there's always the kind of disparity between who's admitting the most. Like obviously corporations come in, but actual individuals, there's a massive difference between the poorest individual, say in like Africa, who probably isn't emitting much really at all in comparison to the rich person who gets a private jet. So yeah, it is interesting. And kind of one thing as well we speak about randomly enough at the beginning, I was kind of asking Ben why, like, how did you get involved in this type of thing and how did you get thinking about environmentalism? And he mentions the new Leaving Cert subject, politics and society. Now, that wasn't something that was on our curriculum, but I think the two of us probably would have chosen that, almost certainly would have been something that we would have actually been really interested in.
Yeah, no, sorry.
No, I just think it's really good that it's like it's opening up people's eyes, and as well, something we were talking about is like people's ambivalence and kind of ignorance to actually how governments work and how like society works, and people kind of think things are like quick fixes rather than long-term planning and solutions. And I think that subject, if that's what's being taught, and it does sound like that from what he was saying, I think it's really positive.
Yeah, no, 100%. And a lot of those new subjects that they've introduced are like kind of getting up to date with like what the changing world, like the new PE curriculum. They've introduced computer science, I think philosophy as well, maybe as well. I'm not sure. But just those new subjects as well are just changing people's behavior and what they want to do with themselves in the world and like their future and their careers they want to go into. So they've been a really positive step that the government have brought in on the Department of Education.
Yeah, because there was calls this year as well to kind of rethink the Leaving Cert, considering they were able to just cancel it pretty quickly. And
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, if you really want to do something, you've seen it like happen overnight. Like I was reading actually a Reddit thread about just like the housing situation and stuff like that, and I remember like 3 or 4 years ago, maybe it was longer than that, I think maybe 2016 or 2017, when like MDMA was like accidentally legalized for like 24 hours. But the government like sat for like the whole night to drop all the bills to make it illegal again. And if the government want to do things, they can do that. Like even when the bank guarantee back in 2008, when that happened, they sat through the Dáil overnight. So they have, like, when they want to put in emergency legislation, they can. It's just about them actually making the decision to do that,
Yeah, but like, how do you make everything that sense of urgency?
Well, you don't, but not everything is urgent, but you can just better manage your time. And also like things like this, when there are people like the housing crisis, which is like the biggest topic on everyone's mind, and anyone who lives in Dublin and the outside of like the outskirts of Dublin, the commuter towns, like that's literally the biggest thing when you talk about, and of our generation, that's our biggest issue along with climate change.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like and I think the thing with that is to think about is climate changes are like long-term anxiety, whereas the housing crisis, well, for us right now, it's kind of like a not completely immediate, but it will probably come quicker than the other ones, and obviously we're paying rent or whatever. But that's something we were talking about at the end, is like, how do we kind of get people to think more long-term, and how do we, like, journalists, instead of looking at the like emissions across like a year-to-year thing for climate change, how do they actually look at it in like a long, like play the long game with this, instead of like letting governments away with short-term fixes and stuff. And as well, one thing we talked about as well, which I'd be interested to hear your opinion on, is how disparaging people are of Eamon Ryan for going into government, where it's like, what would the climate policy have been if he decided not to go into government?
Yeah, absolutely. But he's also like his whole part. Well, the Green Party has had that massive split. A few of the members have left because of that. What's the bill they signed up to?
The
That
climate action bill, or
no, the other one that they maybe it is the climate action bill. Yeah, and
I doubt
yeah,
it's the climate action bill, but I don't know. So
yeah,
yeah, I'm not
okay.
sure.
Yeah, maybe I shall just look this up and we can magically edit this all out.
No, sorry, I genuinely don't know. But yeah, obviously it's interesting. But I think what's important for people to recognize, though, is like with the climate change thing, where people are like disappointed in him for doing things, but like this isn't going to be something that's a quick fix either. You know, that's what I was kind of trying to get
Oh no,
across in the podcast.
100%. Yeah, no, 100%. But it's implementing those policies that we will see the changes over the next 10, 20 years. When like you're not going to change this overnight, as I've said. Like, but like even just taking out cars from the city centre, like that kind of stuff, it's like changing stuff overnight. Like if you ever cycle down the quays, like you have to kind of wear a face mask because the amount of the emissions, like from all the cars there, you know, and it's sometimes just literally like a car park there on the quays. And it's like really sick, like cycling down there, really, you know, if you're not wearing a mask. And that's like that kind of stuff. If you took out the cars from the city centre when people had to use public transport to commute in, imagine just that itself like would cut out how much emissions, like.
Yeah.
Because you're gonna have to basically force people to start doing stuff, otherwise no one's gonna change, you know.
Yeah, but I think that's probably what's coming now in the next 10 years. We're going to see a lot more kind of like intrusive laws that probably force us to do things, which, look, if it's going to mean that our planet isn't completely screwed, I think people will probably suck it up eventually. I think this year is kind of shown, not that like things should infringe, on our freedoms completely, but the fact that like, you know, we can do things that are going to make big changes quickly. So I think people are kind of probably going to be a bit more like open to that. And as well, I don't know what you feel at the minute, but particularly when I listen to Dave McWilliams and like a lot of things about kind of the big changes that are happening about like economics in the US and the kind of big changes that are happening across the world now because we're from home. I feel like there's a lot more positives that are going to come out in the next 5 years from this period than negatives.
Yeah, no, hopefully, yeah, I think so. People's behaviors have changed, and like they did, like there was a 6-month study on like the climate in Europe that it did actually, you know, improve over the COVID lockdowns that happened across mainland Europe and Ireland and the UK and stuff like that. That did make a bit of a change, but like that's gonna have to be extended for so long. But even like people working from home, not driving into the city centre, like I've been saying, that kind of stuff will definitely improve stuff. But the higher reliance on everyone working from home means also electricity. There's going to be more electricity needed and stuff like that. More computers being made, and with that, there is those import. You have to import all that stuff into Ireland, and with that, there's the emissions that come from that, from the cargo ships bringing all the stuff into Ireland and the planes coming in, flying it all in. So, you know, you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, really.
Yeah, no, it's so complex. But yeah, to be honest, this intro kind of sums up exactly what myself and Ben went back and forth kind of with things that are just really complex. And listen, if anyone has any kind of feedback on it, please comment on any of our posts about it. Any of your opinions on this would be really great to hear. Anyone that's kind of really passionate about this would love to know maybe what we got wrong even and what we didn't get across would be good. And definitely just give it a listen. Let us know what you think. Thank you.
Thanks.
Ben Harkin, you're very welcome to the podcast. Thanks a million for coming on. It's great to have.
Thanks very much for having me. Owen, it's great to be on. I'm loving the podcast so far.
Thanks a million, man. But yeah, if you want to explain what the book you've written is, and I suppose as well why you've written it, because one thing I'm struck with you is, you know, you are very young, and not many people your age have written books. So kind of how did it come to be?
Well, I think that's more due to me not having any hobbies more than anything about me being young. But no, so the book I wrote is called Time Nor Tide, Ireland and Climate Change. And I wrote it last year in 2020. I started writing it in March, and I published it then myself in October. I self-published it, and it's all about how, I suppose, the impacts that Ireland will face from climate change, and as well then what we have, that we can make ourselves carbon neutral. So it was kind of like I've always been really interested in climate change, and I suppose I think like everybody found myself with a bit of free time in my hands come March of last year. So I thought, hey, why not? Maybe, this might reach people that aren't normally being reached by books about climate change and stuff. And, why not? I've read enough books. Maybe it's time to have a go at writing one anyway. So that was my 2020.
That's so interesting. What was the reason you kind of got into climate change? Obviously, I know a lot of people kind of our age are into it, but was there, has this always been something since you were young, or what's the kind of inspiration?
Yeah, well, I suppose it was one of the things that was always kind of there. It was just one of them stories. It was always one of them news stories that was always on. But in transition year, I I raided my at this sort of a couple of things happened. I raided my uncle's bookshelf, and I read this book on climate change. It was Naomi Klein's Capitalism versus the Climate. So that was really good. And then another uncle got me and I had a National Geographic subscription from him, and they had like an issue about climate change. And then I read Paul Cunningham wrote a book on climate change in Ireland, Ireland's Burning. And so sort of between those three things in a pretty, close period of time, I suppose showed that, climate change was a very real threat, but also, a solvable one that was it was something that you could think about, ways that it could be fixed. So I suppose then I done for fifth and sixth year then in school, I done politics and society. So climate was kind of part of that there. And I've just always been sort of since then reading about it and, thinking about it, and you're on Twitter and you start following these people and you start seeing, what are they saying and what kind of solutions are there. And yeah, that's kind of been my journey to, through climate. It's just sort of slowly been picking up all these pieces, and then it sort of culminated in a whole pile of research then last year to like I'm not formally educated or anything in it. I do software and electronics in college. So for anyone that reads the book, that's just a disclaimer that there's
No, that's good. But one thing, just random thing you said there, politics and society for the Leaving Cert, that wasn't on the curriculum when I was there, and I think that would have been something I would have been really interested in. But what's the stuff there? Do they go in deep into like topics like climate change, or how does it work?
it's a really interesting subject. So it was in the second year of its existence when I got to do it. And you sort of cover these very broad topics. You cover, things like maybe education and social class and these topics. And then with them, you sort of discuss sort of political thinkers. So, you cover education, and at the same time, you read about John Locke and Thomas Hobbes and their ideas and stuff. And then your bit of work then is you've got to come up with, you've got to find your own education statistics. So you might look at, graduation rates, or, the rate of people going to college from certain counties. And really the whole exam is you write essays on these things. So it might say, talk about education with the ideas of political theorists in mind. So you could say, you talk about education and the statistics, and then you say, I agree with this theorist and I disagree with this one. But it was really interesting because sort of the format of the class, we would do a topic, and then we'd have these walking debates where we'd sort of go to one end of the room, whether we agreed or disagreed, and then got pretty intense after that there. Then we just kind of scream at each other for a while. But no, it was just, it was a great way to learn a topic. And then, we done like environmentalism, and, we done different environmental thinkers, which was really interesting. But no, it gave me an excuse to look at the topic in a lot more depth than I would have in any other subject. And it was nice because you got that importance of seeing other opinions and being able to argue your opinion, which I think then that kind of writing style comes into the book then.
Yeah, no, for sure. But that's I think that's great though that we've got that now in Ireland, because that would have been something I think a lot of people I know would have hopped on as well to get into. And even the fact you're mentioning John Locke and Hobbes there, that was something I was only really exposed to. I did political science in college, so that was on the curriculum, but I wouldn't really known who they were when I was younger or whatever. And like, I couldn't name what their ideas were exactly now, but I still think that's class that from a young age now we can get people who are kind of politically inclined to be kind of actually educated in it, you know?
Yeah, yeah, and it was a really good subject, and I think the nature of you having to kind of get your own statistics, or at least your teacher getting the statistics, keeps it up to date. You know, it's like you're covering the same broad topics, but it's always sort of moving forward, which I like. I think, you know, sometimes subjects like that maybe can get sort of stuck in the mud sometimes,
Yeah.
but the sort of inherent nature of it means it stays new. I know it was only ever subject that I had that you'd actually discuss the subject with other people outside of the classroom. You know, we'd be kind of standing out chatting about it. You weren't standing outside of maths going, geez, that was interesting the last day, you know, it was, but it happened in politics. So yeah, I'd like to see more people do it. I definitely gained a lot from it.
Yeah, no, it's great. And like, I think the fact you've gone and written a book and stuff, I'm not saying that was the only reason why you wrote the book, but I think, you know, it obviously developed a few ideas and stuff, which is good.
Yeah.
But to kind of get onto the book, sorry for that random tangent, but just something I was interested in.
I'd happily talk about politics and society all day.
Did a podcast on that, so but no, like the book is really well written, it's really good. And I think one thing like that's climate change is so scary, and sustainability, the whole area, all these statistics are really scary. So I suppose how do you, a lot of people kind of push that away because the statistics are so scary. How do you think we can get past that to give people this information and then give them the toolkit with how to actually live their life in a sustainable way?
Yeah. So I suppose the book that really made me read a book was The Uninhabitable Earth by David Wallace Wells. I don't know if you've read it or people that are listening to this read it, but it's a terrifying book. Like, it's just every page of that there's just this, you know, unbelievable statistic of what climate change will do. And it is like, it actually is scary when you read that book. And it was reading that you know, made me want to then sort of bring this to Ireland kind of in a way. And yeah, like there is that problem that if you look at these statistics, and especially because so many of them are, you know, this level of flooding by 2100, you know, and I do that in the book too, you know, because that's sort of how these models work. But it's sort of the statistics, they become this sort of huge thing that is so far away and is both so huge that you can do nothing about it. It's just sort of this, you know, it's going to happen, and it is terrifying. So that's sort of, I wanted to write the book to say that, listen, this is exactly what Ireland is going to face, or this is, you know, what we can predict Ireland is going to face. And then from that, at least I think when you give people that idea, that it helps them, because I think so many people will look at climate change and think ice caps melting, flooding, place is going to get warmer generally. But giving people that, you know, exact sort of, this is what it's going to be, so then this is what we need to do to start being able to manage it, because there's going to be that level of managing these things. Now, in Ireland, we're going to be lucky. It's not going to be as bad as it would be if we were in, you know, say closer to the equator or something like that there, or if we were, you know, closer to the polar ice caps. But yeah, there is still, you know, a huge scale to it that is scary. But that is like, there's also a whole lot of positives, you know, as in there's a lot that we can do to reduce our emissions. And that's why I wanted to write the book as well. It has to have these two things in it, that I didn't want to just scare people and then, you know, leave them with that idea. But there is stuff that we can do about it. And there's that sort of line between scaring people and, you know, saying this is a bad thing, but there's something we can do about it. And that's sort of when you kind of have to sort of walk when you're trying to write the book, which isn't easy.
Yeah, and from your perspective, I know there's research done for Sweden and the Nordic countries. They're obviously kind of like ahead of the curve in this, and I think the research shows that they take a lot more personal responsibility, and don't just think that governments are like the sole kind of savior of this, for lack of a better term, or companies are the only, or the, you know, the worst emitters, and you know that they can't actually do anything themselves. And I suppose, what's your take on that? Do you how much do you think personal responsibility actually comes into play in this, and how much do you think, you know, governments are going to just have to clamp down?
Yeah, that's actually very interesting. I never knew that. You know, I must look into that more. But I would think that, like, it's hard to put a figure on it, but you know, an incredible majority of, you know, the responsibility of this relies on government, and that's for two reasons. One, it is sort of a government failure not to act on this before, but also two, it is just hard for, you know, an individual person to do something about their emissions. It's you know, it's not easy, but it's easier for a government. You know, it's easier for a government to move to renewable
Yeah.
sources of energy than it is for me to live in a house without electricity. So that, you know, there's that idea to it. Yeah, like I did want to put that across in the book that that it is a sort of government level. You need these things done. Like I'm not a person that, I'm not trying to tell people, you know, that you got to have your biodegradable toothbrush or, you know, whatever it is that, you know, or paper straws. I hate paper straws so
The
much.
worst.
Oh, they're just the worst product I think I've ever used in my life. Yeah, that's to say, I'm the worst environmentalist on the planet. I just, that stuff annoys me. But yeah, that a lot of this does rely with government, in my opinion, and that I suppose maybe people that you know, have known about climate change for a while, maybe people that are older than me, I wanted to show them what government could do about it. But also, I think people my age, you know, like you were saying earlier, a lot of young people know about climate change, and it's sort of a big thing for people our age, and it's something that people are worried about. And I think that worry leads to people wanting to do something about it. You know, we want to find ways to reduce our emissions, but that ultimately that is what we can do individually, small on the grander scale of things, and that you'd be better focusing your efforts on getting your public representative or whoever to, you know, to try and reduce emissions on a government level.
Have you been disappointed with the Green Party since I know they're a minority, like, and how much power they have, you know, it's hard to measure, but it's probably marginal at best. So, like, I don't know if you voted for them or whatever, but it's you know, it's kind of like the obvious party to vote for if you want to go for like a sustainable, if you're going to go on those lines. But then at the end of the day, they're never probably going to be big enough to actually be making the big decisions. So
yeah, it's not going to be a Greens Fianna Fáil government at any time. It's always going to be the other way around. Yeah, like, listen, the Green Party I think have done some great stuff since they've got into power. You know, like, I think that new climate bill is fantastic, and they have done a lot of stuff with regards to, you know, like now about electricity being sold back to the grid, although that has been in the works for a while. But it'll be interesting to see what's done of it. There's been a lot of focus on greenways and transportation and stuff like that there, which will be interesting. Like, yeah, like I think the Greens have done a lot. And, you know, I suppose you're always going to be disappointed with whoever, you know, comes in. Like, I think I've been pretty disappointed with the opposition as well on this, have kind of avoided it. You know, like, the Social Democrats have been good, but maybe without any solid plans, as of Labour. And Sinn Féin have kind of avoided the question altogether. I think kind of Sinn Féin, Fine Gael are probably happy to just leave climate where it is. I'm always pretty surprised by how positive Fianna Fáil seem to be to climate action. You know, they do generally, I think, seem to be. And I talk about this in the book, that you can't, I think the way that you get a government to change its view isn't just to vote for whoever the Green Party is or the Environmental Party is, but you got to have the person that, you know, that controls the purse strings to care about climate action. Like, it doesn't really matter what, say, Eamon Ryan wants to do if Pascal Donoghue thinks, you know, climate change is nonsense. You have to have, you know, it's got to be this whole sort of chain. And I think, you know, because of the way we've maybe reported on climate change in the past, it has become its own sort of niche issue, in the same way that, you know, why you have a Department of Climate Action, whereas really it's this more broader issue that comes into everything, that you then, so you need to have everyone at the cabinet table caring about climate action and deeply understanding, you know, what is needed. And that's, I think, that idea of people having this understanding kind of lends itself into my writing of the book, that the book's kind of written like a handbook. You can just open it up on electricity or agriculture, whatever, and you can flick through and you can read it. They don't really run on to each other. And I wanted people that, if a county councillor or whoever was to pick it up, that they could, you know, learn pretty easily what, you know, what can be done about it. Sorry, I've kind of wandered from the question there. It's kind of hard to come down absolutes in politics, but yeah, listen, like, the Greens have done a lot, and it will be hard to know, you know, what they've achieved, I think, for quite a while. You'll need to go through a government or two until you know, is the climate bill working, or are governments just ignoring it? Sort of a
come back on your Sinn Féin point. I wonder if there's a Venn diagram for the I think you say in the book there's 1 in 8 Irish people don't believe in climate change. Would those 1 in 8 coincide with the as Sinn Féin supporters? I would
I don't know.
probably
I
say
would
so.
be reluctant to name any kind of party to put them in that camp. Like I do say in the book on that point that maybe, like, I think a lot of people that say they don't believe in climate change are probably just apathetic to climate change. They probably just don't really care. You know, either way, it's just not an issue. So they'll just say I don't believe in it or whatever. Yeah, I don't like. I think every party probably has its, except for the Green Party, has its, you know, it has people that don't believe in climate change or don't think it's an issue, and that's fair enough. You know, there are other things to work on that are, you know, that people believe in, and that's fine. But yeah, no, like that's just something that I've been thinking about today. That maybe that there could have been more of a push for more ambition from, but as well, maybe you just say that this is the Green Party's job, and we're not going to get in the way of that there, and we're going to focus on, you know, housing, you know, other things that Sinn Féin have been working on. It's, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, look, it's not an easy job. I think there's so many different issues going on, and you know, probably a silly comment to me to make, but yeah, it's a difficult one, and I think that's probably the problem with calling yourself the Green Party is then, as you said, then it becomes like, well, that's their issue, and we can't actually take that over.
Yeah, and there is, and yeah, and then it sort of lends itself into the idea of, well, if they are the Green Party, then is everybody else then not the Green Party?
Yeah.
You know, like there's sort of this, you know, sort of push and pull of how that there works. But yeah, like every party, you know, needs to, I think, maybe push a bit harder on climate action. But like I'm not a person that will.
All right.
Sorry, I lose you there. Sorry.
No, it's still there. Go on.
I'm not a person that will say that, you know, climate is the only thing we should work on. You know, there are a whole pile of other problems that, you know, parties are gonna talk about that I'm not gonna write a book on.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. And one point I wanted to get to actually, because you come from, like, you know, you come from an area that's big on farming, and I think you're talking about being with your friend in farming, and his kind of pushback is that it's kind of like a middle class thing, if that makes sense. And I think that it actually is a big issue. Now, I'm not saying that like the evidence is not in the farmer's side, obviously. I think it's pretty bad. But at the same time, like, someone's always going to protect their livelihood. And I think there is kind of, like, you know, a major or a massive class of, like, middle class people in, say, Dublin is the obvious one, that really don't understand that demographic of farmers who are obviously going to protect their livelihood, and who just think that, you know, farmers are just doing this for some, like, evil reason to kill the environment.
Yeah, there is that kind of strange idea among some environmentalists that some farmers seem to go out with the idea of, you know, emitting as much as they can.
Yeah.
For some reason. Yeah, like yeah, Jamie is a sort of a character in the book, and he crops up because, you know, and this comes up all the time. Like, this is something that he's, you know, genuinely worried about, is somebody that wants to have a career in agriculture. Will that be stopped by the government's, you know, climate action? And like, you can't just listen to that and say, well, you know, climate's important, you know, don't worry about it. Like, this, you know, you shouldn't be thinking like that there. You should only be focused on the climate. Yeah, like, you know, this is something that comes up every time people talk about climate change, you know, it's because I think the nature of when you have a debate on these things on, say, radio or talk shows, there's always the two talking heads, and it's sort of one against the other. And I think maybe we've got into this idea that it is sort of environmentalism and climate action versus farmers, and then you're trying to, and now it is so much more complicated than that there. And I don't want to say that I'm representing farmers. Like, my grandfather owns a farm, and I've never worked on it a day in my life. You know, that's not. There's a reason I'm writing a book. You know, that's where my kind of skills are. But yeah, like, it's like agriculture it's a tough one to deal with. It emits a huge amount. It's a third of our emissions. Now, 11 million tons CO2 equivalent to that is methane, and that's coming from cows. So I think as well we run into the problem of, you know, we say that sort of cows are agriculture, and the same way maybe we think that cars are everything else. And when you are then a dairy farmer or a beef farmer, understandably you're going to feel like you're under attack, and these people are not paid enough. You know, you're on a real knife edge when you're looking at these, like in the West, grants make up 105% of the average farmer's income. Like, you are entirely relying on these government grants to keep you going, because that's the nature of it. So then you're going to worry that if a government's going to come in and take this away, well, you're not going to have a viable business to run anymore, or a farm to run.
But surely it's not viable then if it's already been completely subsidized.
Yeah, well, so the income is 105% on average. That's from Chagas. Like, I think small scale agriculture is probably not financially viable, but it's also much better for the environment than huge
factory farming.
So there's that, and as well, like, the idea of maybe good farms, bad farms is wrong too. Thomas Duffy on Twitter kind of, regularly talks about this. He's really interested on it. Like, you have to empathize and listen. And I think that, the Minister for Agriculture is doing a good job on working on new ways that we can look at environmentalism while bringing farmers in, like sort of low input pastures for cows and stuff like that there, which is, I think, a really interesting idea.
What's your meat consumption like at the minute? What do you personally do?
I have never reduced my meat consumption, and I don't know if I really intend to. Like, I've lived at home for the past year, and I eat when I'm given, and more than likely that's, it's got meat in it of some kind. And like, it's the same way, like I was saying about personal responsibility. It's I don't think me not having sausages on a Sunday morning is going to make that much of a difference in the terms of the emissions of Ireland. And maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe it's wrong for me to talk about climate action while still, doing these things that isn't great for the environment. But I think also it's important to note that I think of myself as a pretty normal person. Like, climate action, environmentalism isn't my personality, or it isn't my whole life. It's just one thing that I do, and I talk about it. And you can talk about reducing emissions while still doing things that emit. I'm going to take a car places when maybe I could walk or take a bus.
Yeah.
I don't think that makes what I write in the book any less true.
No, I'm not saying it like that. I think,
I know. It's just that it is something that comes up a lot. That sort of climate activists that, like, like Greta Thunberg sailed all the way to America, which was an incredible thing to do. And if she had took a plane, I'm sure every tabloid would have given out that she had taken a plane, and
the
messenger would have given out that oh, she's taking a plane, and then she's telling us. And I'm just definitely not strong enough to sail across the Atlantic or give up meat. I think it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting. And I don't know what the answer to that is, I suppose, because there's obviously some people that do make the personal sacrifices. Like, I know a lot of people that have gone vegan or whatever. But like, I think at the end of the day, it's probably going to have to be some kind of government legislation that kind of primes the environment, that makes it very easy for us to make decisions. And like,
that's exactly what it is. Like, the state has it can be powerful in this area of sort of giving you better choices, of incentivizing and de-incentivizing things. And like, listen, I'd like to probably reduce maybe consumption a bit. Maybe if I wasn't living at home and I was, I probably end up, kind of naturally I would, and that's probably something that more people will do. But yeah, I don't know. It's a tough one.
Yeah, and I think one thing I was interested as well in is that you were talking about was kind of exporting emissions, but then also, like, you can make a decision. So say, for example, like a vegan from Ranelagh or whatever is going to get their, avocados toast on a Saturday. But, where are those avocados coming from? They're getting flown in from wherever, which the emissions from that could be extortionate as well. And then I think you mentioned as well, a lot of the export emissions are coming from, smartphone production or laptops or whatever. It's any electrical device, really.
Well, it's interesting as well because, so I talk about exported emissions to raise the point that the emissions that we have here aren't really a full picture. Everything that we import here has emissions, and, by taking it in, by that nature, we're exporting the emissions out. And the same way that we export a lot of our beef, and the countries then are sort of exporting their beef emissions over here that
Yeah.
then we're trying to fix. So yeah, like export emissions, you know, how you can fix that is you can probably look at some kind of a border carbon tax, which the EU is looking at. But it is going to be tougher because you have countries like China and stuff that maybe aren't going to try and that it's tougher. Like how do you make cement carbon neutral? Like I don't want to be the person that has to try and figure that out on a national level. It's far easier to just import that and not worry about the emissions. So then when we look at countries that are developing and we say, well, their emissions are rising or their emissions are very high, part of the reason is because they're doing a lot of the stuff that we would have been doing, you know, other than the fact that they're there and that now we're getting them to do it. So is it fair that because they're producing all of our goods and say a lot of our food or whatever, that now they also have to figure out all of their emissions, that if we are developed enough that we're sort of exporting our manufacturing, then we also have to export some of our responsibility on climate action.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And as well, one of the kind of ones that people don't really like tackling, I suppose, is flying, because everyone loves to travel, everyone wants to go to all these different places, and I think, to be fair, what you talk about is that cars are by far the worst for transport.
Like private cars are by far and away for Ireland, you know, the highest emitters for transport. Flying planes is our international aviation for Ireland is it 2.5 million tons of, you know, carbon dioxide. Our bogs emit 3.5 million tons of carbon dioxide. So, you know, flying isn't insignificant, but it's also not, you know, this you know, huge thing. And it is that nature of how we've talked about climate action in the past, or how we've talked about climate change in the past. We've often used pictures of planes as an emitter because, you know, they give off a huge amount of steam and smoke and it looks really bad. And it is something that we need to figure out. It's a tough one. Planes are really heavy and they carry a lot of people in it. So batteries just aren't great at the minute because batteries aren't really energy dense enough. And if you're to fill like a jumbo jet of, you know, if you're to get that on batteries, it would just be full of batteries. There'd be no people on it, which then isn't really good. So more than likely, that's going to be some kind of a biofuel. I think that maybe as we start absorbing carbon technically, we might be able to use that as some kind of a, you know, make our own kind of hydrocarbon that we can run fuels on. Yeah, you know, again, you're probably not going to scale that level of fuel manufacturing. You know, like if it isn't something we're using now, then it's not going to be 100% of the market in 20 or 30 years time. You know, that's just not how these things work. In the same way that, you know, when you started using petrol or diesel, it doesn't, you know, everyone in the world doesn't start using it within 10 or 15 years. It takes quite a while. So more likely they're just going to be emissions that we're just going to have for a while. And then instead you try and reduce the amount of flying that people do. More than likely that's just by increasing the cost of it, which means that rich people that are doing a majority of the flying anyway are going to be able to continue to fly. And people that were maybe going for their, you know, their holiday to Spain for a week every 2 or 3 years aren't going to afford going. That's it, you know.
Yeah. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's not fair, and maybe it's a sacrifice that we have to make, or you know, to reduce emissions.
You had an interesting one in the book where it was talking about you have a certain amount of air miles per year, and those things can carry over.
That was one that has been looked at. Yeah, that, you know, say, you know, we get say 1,000 miles or whatever a year, and then you can just, you know, carry it over. You know, so you don't use it for a couple of years, you can go and see the world. And it's interesting. You know, I like maybe the idea of it, but also it is hard to implement. You know, how do you track people's miles and stuff like that there?
Yeah.
And you know, it could be used. Maybe there is a way of doing it. I just kind of wanted to bring all these ideas out there for people to decide themselves what they can do, that there is something other than just making it really expensive.
Yeah, I thought it, like when I first read that idea, I was kind of like, that's not a runner, and that, like, I thought it was a terrible idea, but then also I just thought that, you know, it was never going to pass anyway. But then I started thinking, and I was like, because you talked about like boat trips and stuff, and I thought that maybe this could be like a really cool age of exploration where all our our long distance travel is done by the sea or like trains, you know, instead, where we go and see, you know, cool places, and it's over a much longer period of time. But it's particularly with like remote working now, we could have all these cool hubs on boats and stuff. Anyway, a ridiculous
Yeah,
idea that came to my
maybe
head.
instead of going to Spain for a week every year, you take 2 months off at some point. You just go and see Europe by
Mm,
train or something like that. There, you know, like that is, and yeah, like you say, because of remote work, it's not 2 months off. It's 2 months away from Ireland. Yeah, like yeah, that could be, you know, that is a great idea. I love that idea of, you know, you see the world differently and you get to see so much more of it when you're not just going from A to B and not seeing any of that, what I'm sure is really cool stuff in between.
mm,
And that then is, you know, partly again, it's sort of probably de-incentivizing flying, but it's incentivizing things like taking boats and trains and stuff and making them better. Also, there's like, you know, people are going to want to do that. They're going to want to see the world, and then other people aren't. I personally have no wild interest in traveling. It's just never been something that's, you know, that's interesting me. So then how do you, you know, like we were saying about the air miles thing, is it fair that you who might have more interest in it are sort of suffering,
mm.
and whereas it doesn't really affect me because I don't want to go anywhere anyway. But yeah, I like that idea of seeing the world by boat. Sounds fun.
It
Again,
does
not
actually.
sailing though, not sailing, big cruise ship.
Well, I'm sure. Hopefully, it seems like there'd be kind of by train anyway. I mean, you could get an incredible amount of places from mainland Europe by train. So
Yeah,
I mean, there's definitely ways that it could be done, but you know, obviously these are big picture plans. But I think it's just kind of flipping the way we look at things. You know, I mean, I like even looking at different kind of ways that we holiday. I used to work for a hiking company that did like, you know, hiking trails by app, and you know, that's obviously a very carbon neutral way to travel if you're
yeah,
going
yeah.
100
It
kilometers
is
by
the
foot.
carbon neutral way to travel. It really is.
So yeah,
Yeah,
like
that's,
there is
yeah, there
ways
is
that we
more.
can look at this in a different way, and I think that's going to be the how do we convince people to look at that in particular, because I think that's particularly for young people, that's probably the stickler. Obviously not you, you seem to love Ireland, so
I'm happy out in Donegal. I've got everything I want right here. Yeah, no, and like there is this idea of, you know, like when it's over the last year, we've all been in lockdown, and it's obviously been terrible, and it's, you know, so many people have lost so much, but also, you know, people have discovered, you know, things, they've discovered things like walking and being in
mm,
their area and what's there that maybe they weren't appreciating beforehand. So maybe then as we go into the future, and you know, we will discover these things that maybe we didn't appreciate enough,
yeah.
you know, when we had them, or you know, we never realized were there. There, like that will happen. That when we look at things as maybe purely negative, there'll be a whole lot of positives that we can't imagine yet.
And I think you're dead right. Like that has come with the pandemic. And actually, what are the kind of what's the? I know the early indicators on kind of climate change seem quite good for the fact that there was, you know, less people moving about during the pandemic. What as that has kind of gone on, obviously it was kind of small scale study. I assume at the start. So what is it now?
It does seem that globally, and like that, or for most countries anyway, it seems that most countries had kind of had a smallish sort of dip for last year, and it'll probably just kind of go back up to higher than it was for 2019 for this year or next year. You know, that sort of linear
Mm,
growth will probably kind of stay, because so a lot of people were saying this because, you know, people aren't flying, people aren't, you know, going in the car or the bus or whatever, they're staying at home, they're staying close. But the underlying things, the inherent things that cause emissions for countries were still going. So, you know, me and you weren't in the car going to school, but delivery drivers were taking everything to everyone's houses. You know, like
mm,
construction was still going, you know, that, and as well, like everyone was at home, so people are still using electricity and all that there. Like even, you know, people say this, that, you know, oh, they weren't in office buildings, but office buildings use a whole pile of energy even when no one's in them, just to kind of keep them ticking over. So it doesn't look like it's made that much of an impact, which I think does lend itself to the idea that this is more uh, a government thing that has to be done rather than just people. You know, people can stay at home and not go anywhere, but it's not going to make a huge difference, because it is these underlying things, these emissions at a large scale, that cause global warming, not the sort of choices that me and you make.
Yeah. How do you think we get people to think about kind of like 2080 rather than 2030, if that makes sense? So realistically, the actual effects aren't going to be seen till probably another while, where it's going to really affect people's daily lives, and probably our parents won't be around by then and stuff. So it's kind of difficult for that generation, particularly they're the ones in power, really. But I think I've heard in Japan before, they do these kind of like local committees where one half has to be citizens now and the other half has to think of citizens as citizens from 2050 or something. And apparently that leads to more actual long-term thinking. Obviously that makes sense, but it does actually work. People do actually take it quite seriously. And those type of new things could work, but it's difficult. Like how politics is really based on the issue now. You know what I mean? Housing at the minute, that's going to be the big thing because it's affecting people's pocket right now.
Yeah. How do you do that? That's really interesting about Japan. Again, you've heard about so many things that would be very good to have in the book. I kind of wish I had your knowledge before I wrote it, but yeah, so there's a tough one, because you want people to think into the future enough that they will, consider things that are maybe beyond their time, but not so far in the future that it's not a worry. Like I say, if you think of 2100, there's kind of a chance you'll go, somebody will figure it out.
Yeah.
Then I don't really need to worry about it. They said the hole in the ozone was going to be a problem, and I don't really hear about it. I'm sure climate change will just go away. So I think it is that there's this idea that you have to treat climate change as something that comes into everything, right? It's like air; it just gets everywhere, it just fills the space that it's in. So that when the Minister for Agriculture is talking about problems, that he is talking about, well, this is going to get worse in the future. And that when the Minister for Finance is talking, he's saying, well, insurance payouts are going to increase in the future because we're going to have more flooding. That it is this thing that becomes part of everything that we talk about. And there's sort of, it's hard to find a comparison for that. There's nothing really that works quite like this. But there is a skill if you need everybody talking about it, and also talking about it having the real impacts and the things that they're looking at. And I think as well, it's interesting that, I like saying that we tend to just focus on what's now, but even when we do look in the future, we tend to look maybe 20 to 30 years in the future. Like even now we have, is it like Ireland 2040 is sort of the government's plan at the minute, but we never think and say, I think it's interesting, what does Ireland look like in 100 years time or 200 years time? Like Ireland is kind of relatively new to this whole being a country thing. So how do what happens in the future? I don't have any answers or any kind of real theories, but it's just an interesting experiment. What are the things we're doing now that are going to shape what the country's like in 100 years time?
But it's kind of like it's a defect of our minds or something, because we've got that end of history illusion where we don't we can see how much we've changed ourselves in the last 10 years, but we still think we won't change in the future.
Yeah. There is that we tend to think, and this is sort of an idea that I think about on sort of a personal level, but I think it does work on a kind of macro level as well, that we can look at sort of today and next week and next month as us or around us being completely different. But in a year's time, we tend to think things are pretty much the same. So if you do that, like I think about it on a personal level, people tend to think they can transform themselves in a year or a week or a month and doing whatever, but that in a year's time, things are, pretty much the same. I think we do that as well. We think that the government should do this right now to fix this problem that we're seeing, but not, well, what are you working on that's going to have the results in a year's time?
That's where brands get away with it, because brands can do these kind of like, obviously just put out a statement or something, or come out with this little gimmicky thing. I'm trying to think of an example,
but green or something like that there.
Yeah, and then it's like everyone's like, "Oh my god, I love them. They're so sustainable." They don't even look into what they're actually doing. So it's so easy for a brand to just do these quick fixes. Like, no one cares if a government pretends to be sustainable, because it's like journalists will hold them to account, but businesses get away with it so easily.
Yeah, and I think that we sort of fail, maybe personally and maybe in sort of a journalist sense as well, that to sort of keep this long investigation into things.
Yeah.
You know, like I think we could do a whole lot better job in Ireland of understanding how the sort of bills and stuff get made, because it does take a long time and it's a long process, and it's, you know, and a lot of things change. We could do a better job of, you know, how long it took to get it, and then how's it going, you know, like what, you know, so this has been done a year, 2 years, or 3 years ago. What's happened with it, you know, how, you know, like, yeah, so you know, as this works for brands, right, you changed your label to green, you know, for a month last year.
Yeah.
What have you done since then now to, you know, to change it, that we could do better? Then again, I'm not a journalist, so it's very easy for me to say, oh, sure, why wouldn't you just do this, you know? I'm not
Yeah, no, I don't. I completely understand that, and but I think it goes back to what we were talking about at the start. It's where, you know, you were talking about politics and society for the Leaving Cert. It's where we actually teach people from a young age, like, this is how this works. Okay, you're not going to get 1,000,000 houses built this year, you know, or whatever. Obviously, 1,000,000 is an exaggeration, but
1 million wind turbines or
yeah,
whatever. Yeah,
it's like, you know, this is going to be a long process. Okay, so, and then it's also about, you know, getting across the governments to not just be thinking in 5-year cycles as well, because obviously that's the difficulty
yeah,
of a democracy, is that it's constantly being you know, voted in for, which is the great part about democracy, but then leads to these stagnations as well, or changes in policy.
yeah. And then,
So
and I wonder as well, like when we think about climate action, like we always talk about what are the annual reductions, what is the percentage reduction every year, like, you know, I say this in the book, that like the whole debate on forming a government last year just came to a deadlock as they sort of argued about this sort of point of a percentage in changes of emissions each year. Whereas I don't really know if that's how you do it. Like, I don't know if you build a district heating system and you run it all on fossil fuels for a couple of years, and then you change it like that to green fuels, and suddenly you're at a carbon neutral heating for a city or a town or whatever. Like, that doesn't quite work with the idea of annual reductions, but it does reduce the emissions. And I think if you go on this, you know, well, emissions this year were 50 or 60 million tons and they're exactly the same this year, you know, you failed. But maybe, you know, a lot's been done to sort of set up this groundwork, then, you know, leads to reduction in the future. That
but it's
I don't.
almost, that's almost just, you know, like a false understanding of science, because 1 year is obviously not a big enough sample size. You know, obviously there's
Yeah,
365 days within that. But I think,
yeah,
you know, that's one thing I talked to Luke O'Neill about last week, is that we don't actually understand numbers very well, and
yeah.
percentages and statistics and science. Just we don't. Most people don't get that, and I certainly don't.
Yeah, like we're not kind of built to intuitively understand how that there works. And yeah, like, and yet, you know, that's perfect. Oh, 1 year isn't a good enough sample size, because you see what happens, and roughly, you know, GDP is kind of correlated with emissions. It's sort of decoupling now, which is what we want. You know, we want to still have kind of growth, but without the emissions. But yeah, you know, you could have a really bad year financially and emissions will drop, but obviously that's not good.
Yeah.
You know, we don't want another 2008 financial crisis, even though that would reduce emissions quite a bit. You know, you've got to have this kind of longer thinking. Yeah, it's good to hold government to account and to look at, you know, how are we doing year on year. But I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, you know, maybe it is a way to do it, but I think anyway, it's more about setting out these things. And then that will hold, I think, this government to account. You know, when we look back on this as the Greens in power, and, you know, what did they do that sort of set the snowball running down the hill? You know, that if the next government can they just kind of wipe everything clean and forget about it? Or has everything been set in motion that will change things in the future?
Yeah. Yeah, no, like I see, like I go onto Twitter sometimes and I read the most disparaging things about Eamon Ryan. Like he sold his soul for power and he's not doing anything. And I kind of wonder, you know, it's like he's really, you know, he obviously did go into power, but you know, is that really the way we go about this? Like, who knows what exactly he's doing.
Yeah, like I don't understand what Eamon Ryan would have done if he wasn't in government.
Yeah.
Like I don't understand how a Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael rural independence, which I think was the most likely option, how their, what was their climate action bill gonna be? Like I don't think there would have been much to it. And maybe there would have been, maybe Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael would have done a brilliant job on it. But personally, like I think Eamon Ryan was right to go into government. I don't think it's not nice, it's not pretty, it's not what you want. But that's how governing is. It's compromising, and that's not a whole lot of fun. But that's the way the game works. And I think Eamon Ryan was right to go into government. I think the Greens were right to go into government. And you can sit on the sidelines, and you can do great things in the opposition. You can hold government account, you can push them in the right direction. But I think that when this is your party's job, if you're the Green Party, and if this is what you say it is, that this is a critical point, then you have to go into government. That's just you just have to do that there. So I think he was right. And yeah, like people will say he wanted for power and all that there. I don't personally think I think if Eamon Ryan wanted power, he'd be in a different party.
Yeah.
I can't see, I don't know, just who would go to the Green Party thinking we're gonna rule the country. But yeah, like he does get slated a lot for it, but I think he was right, and I think he'll be judged to have been right in the future as well.
Yeah, no, it's a difficult one. I think it's like I have sympathy for people in power. I have to say, like not obviously that doesn't really make sense as a statement, but it's not. I don't think it's as easy as everyone kind of wants it to be, and that's something that you obviously have to hold power to account, but
yeah,
it's never going to be
definitely.
easy.
And I think something that I wanted to get across in the book, because I kind of understood that a lot of people that would read this would be the only book that they would read on climate change. They read it because I wrote it and they picked it up, but also it might be the only book that they'd read on potential kind of government policy. And I wanted to get across that it's not as simple as this is electricity, this is transport, this is agriculture, you're done, go home, that's you. That you can do one thing and it'll reduce a bit, but it might have some negative impacts. And you've got that it is tough to do things. It's tough to come down on any one idea. And yeah, like I understand what you're saying. Yeah, maybe sympathy is mightn't be the right word for it, but yeah, no, I understand what you're saying, that it is tough to be in power. It's tough to govern. It's especially tough to do it now.
Yeah. And then I suppose just on that, like it's climate change and sustainability, very difficult topic. There's so many different things. Like, I mean, the amount of like different headings in your book, that there's so many different aspects to this. And I think that's something that kind of pushes people away from getting involved, because like, where do you start? What, like, do people actually even know what climate change really means? Like, what does this actually mean? And I don't think I have a proper grasp of this topic at all. Right. So it's like, for people like you're obviously very well informed. How do you stay informed, but also how do you just get that base level where at least if you're reading an article, you can get the gist of most things?
Yeah, well, I'll describe so to write the book itself and to do that there research. So like I said, I'd sort of, like, I read a lot. I read about a book a week. That was kind of a challenge I'd done a couple of years ago, and I just kind of kept it up. And a few of them books were on climate change. And so when I decided to write the book, I'd read a few books on the topic on Ireland and climate change and stuff. Well, it's on Ireland climate change. You can have Paul Cunningham's book, and you have Whittled Away by Padraig Fogarty, I think his name is, from the Irish Wildlife Trust. And those are kind of the two books on Ireland and climate change, other than my own. But I read a lot about it, and then I just sort of like really dived deep into the Citizens Assembly on climate change. Was really good. I listened to all them talks, any podcast that I couldn't, and then just devoured scientific papers, EPA reports, stuff like that, emissions reports, stuff like that there. And then once you get that understanding, it's far easier then to read other things kind of quickly, and you get what it's saying. And I wanted to get that across in the book too, that if this was to be the only thing that people would read on climate action, then they'd be fine. That the people can understand what parts per million means, or why different degrees are important and stuff like that there, so that you can see it on the news and you can go, that's bad, rather than just saying 420 parts per million. what's, it
Yeah.
doesn't mean anything. But yeah, how do I stay informed? I suppose Twitter is really useful for that there. And then just how I just keep reading, and hey, if things catch my attention on different scientific papers and stuff like that there, I like to kind of dive. That's always good for diving a bit deeper into it. But actually, I don't really learn by watching or to kind of talking too much. Like I wouldn't ever think on sitting down to watch a documentary on climate change or even talking to people. I read, and that's kind of how I learn. But I spoke to Connor Murphy, who's a professor in Maynooth. It was just when I started writing the book, I sent him an email. I'm writing a book. Would love to talk to you about your work. He's done amazing research. Check him out on the impacts of climate change. So he's just kind of describing to me some of the results of this here, and I don't think I had ever said my age to him, and maybe he just assumed I was a lot older than I was, because he was on the phone. He said, what, I'm sure you'll remember the flooding in 2003. And I was, oh yeah, I do. I was kind of pushing imaginary children out of the room for me to have it was so I just stuck to the books after that there then, but he was very useful in it. And so that's how I sort of really learned the topic, and the book is very well referenced for anyone that might be worried that I don't know what I'm talking about. Everything in it is fact checked quite a few times.
That's good. What's the book for this week then? What book are you reading?
I've got Mission Economy, The Moonshot Guide to Changing Capitalism. Pascal Donoghue reviewed it pretty positively in the Irish Times a few months ago. So that's what I'm reading at the minute, and it's very good. I'm really enjoying it. So if anyone has any book recommendations, I'm Harkin_Ben on Twitter. And your podcast has been really useful. I've got a whole pile of books to read now. But I actually read, I was after Christmas, I read Mark Tagg's book, and he's been on your podcast.
Yeah.
And I have no more interest in Irish soccer than the man on the moon. I'd watch paint dry before I'd watch a game of soccer. But that book is unbelievable. Anyone that hasn't got a chance to read it yet, definitely go and give that there a read.
Yeah, you're amazing. The second Donegal man after Mark to come on, I believe.
Yeah, the forgotten Donegal idea has been kind of pushed away by your podcast here. You're breaking down boundaries.
My mother wouldn't have it any other way. She's a proud Donegal woman. But no, it's
the flag up behind me, really. Portrait of Jim McGuinness.
Yeah, you need the whole shrine. Yeah, Packie Bonner, Shay Given, the lot. But Ben, it's been absolutely great to talk to you. Great to read your book. Thanks for being a supporter of the podcast as well. I really, really appreciate that. But so good to meet you and actually have a chat. And just fascinating. Just all the stuff you've written is just so fascinating. And I think there'll probably be another book out here. I can sense it. What do you think?
You never know. I don't have any plans to write one yet now, but I might. We'll see. Thanks very much for having me on. I've really enjoyed being on. I'm absolutely loving the podcast. It's been brilliant.
Jen, we'll chat to you again.